There we are. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Thursday night. Glad you could join us. So it is Thursday night. It's 7 p.m. and here we are. Well, here I am. Kay will be with us shortly. So we had to do a little dividing and conquering tonight. But she'll be here momentarily. So welcome, everybody. Hey, Rich and Miss Angie, congratulations on your son's wedding last weekend or last week. Miss Catherine, welcome, welcome, welcome. Hey, Carolyn from Tennessee, glad that you joined us. Thank you so much. Hey, Robin. So, what did you say? Clammy. Oh, hi, clammy. So, I love your use of adjectives, Robin. You always come up with clever, different adjectives. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. And the Sardinas are with us. So thank you for joining us. So Miss Polly, I saw Miss Polly's name bouncing around there somewhere. So, so glad that you're with us. So, and thank you. Thanks for being here with us tonight. We are going to continue in our study on the book of Numbers. We left off last week with Numbers verse 7, okay? And we'll pick up the narrative there. But recall that there's a bit of I guess you could say a revamping or a reiteration or a restart, if you will, after the fiasco that has occurred over the last few weeks with Korah and the upheaval and the rebellion and all of these things that have been going on, not because God's done anything wrong, but because the people would just simply refuse. Not all of them, but a large segment of the people refuse to listen to God. So but in His mercy, God dealt with those who would not listen to Him, and those who were causing trouble and dissension and division in the ranks. And the lessons that we learned. Hey, you made it.
I'm super high.
You're super high.
You're lower than me.
Oh, she's not high like drug high. She's high. Her seat's way elevated.
I know. I was like, whoa, look how tall I am. I'm super tall.
So just to be clear.
Taller than you.
Yeah, don't want any rumors getting started. Okay. Okay.
Nothing like that.
But
put
she's
up
here.
The slide
She made it. So, but so as we were saying, so there's been some massive rebellion. There's been some massive correction, and now the Lord is revamped or reiterated, I should say, and there's been a test, and God made it emphatically clear that Aaron and his sons were indeed the only ones who were entitled to the office of high priest, and he's reiterated that the Levites, from the clan that Aaron and Moses are from, the Levites are to have very, very significant and important roles in the functioning of the tabernacle and the worship of God, but they are never allowed to cross over and take on certain priestly responsibilities, and he made that abundantly clear, and now he's clarifying again to Aaron what his role is and how that role will be carried out. He's also making it clear for all to hear that the Levites they're not entitled to some of the same privileges as the rest of the tribes, i.e. land holding and things of that nature, but they are entitled to certain portions of the offering, and their tasks are subdivided into very specific areas, which we talked about in previous chapters, and that's kind of where we ended up. And I think we ended up with 1 Corinthians 12:4, which I don't have up here, but it talks about in 1 Corinthians 12:4, in case you're not familiar with that passage, it talks about the varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. That's, of course, 1 Corinthians is New Testament, but it's talking about Variety of gifts, same spirits. Varieties of service, but the same Lord. Varieties of activities. It is the same God who empowers them all and everyone. And here's the key: to each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. So part of the rebellion was because Korah and his henchmen were jealous of the role that Moses and Aaron had, not fully understanding that with that role came unimaginable responsibility. And so God is clearly reiterating that every task and every role is important. And that's kind of where we pick up the narrative. Do you have anything to add to that, Doc?
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay, you ready?
Oh, this is the wrong book.
Oh no, you brought the wrong book.
It looks similar. That's okay.
Oh, she grabbed the wrong textbook, but that's all right.
That's all right. I
That's all
remember
right.
what I read. I would just like to read it to you guys, but
Yeah.
it might be in here.
So,
Let's see.
all right. So without further ado, we are going to pick up the narrative tonight. Numbers chapter 18, starting in verse 8. Okay, you ready?
Some of it will be in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
it'll be in there.
Then the Lord spoke to Aaron, "Now behold, I myself have put you in charge of my offerings. All the holy gifts of the sons of Israel I have given to you as a portion, and to your sons as a permanent allotment. This shall be yours from the most holy gifts reserved from the fire. Every offering of theirs, namely every grain offering, every sin offering, every guilt offering, with which they shall make restitution to me, shall be most holy for you and for your sons."
Okay, so, and again, just to reiterate, we know we're talking Old Testament times. We know that sacrifices were mandatory, okay? The sacrifices are no longer mandatory because Jesus made the ultimate, once and for all-encompassing sacrifice of himself and his shed blood, and that supersedes all of these offerings, which we've studied extensively through the last several months. Okay, and lest there be any doubt, Scripture says, "Now behold, I myself," God Himself is speaking to Aaron, so there can be no ambiguity. There can be no like, well, Aaron just appointed himself, and Aaron just decided this for himself, and Aaron thought it would be best if he did this and that and the other. No. Scripture records that God Himself is saying, this is how it's going to be. This is how it's going to be. That might upset some people, but you know what? It's God's universe. It's God's creation.
He made it.
It's God's rules.
Right?
It's God's rules, okay?
We live in His creation.
That is the beauty of creation, but it is also the downfall of many a person, because we, in our sinful nature, hate the idea that we are subject to anyone or anything, okay, even God Himself. But God makes it abundantly clear that the rules, the order, the things that He institutes always are for our utmost benefit. When we examine the things of God, we see that though they don't make sense to us, or though they stick in our craw because we're rebellious, when we examine his edicts, though, we if we're honest with ourselves, we find that they are always the best for us as the human race. So God says, I'm putting you in charge, Aaron. There's no ambiguity. You are the high priest. You and subsequently his sons will be and for this service, you will be entitled to the holy gifts. Now remember, here holy means set apart. Set apart, so the gifts that are set apart. So the things that are dedicated for the offering, a portion of that will go to the sustenance and the maintenance of your family and the survival of your family. And then he names a portion of the grain offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, and we covered extensively. Gay did a masterful job of breaking those down into exactly what that means. various portions of the animals that were sacrificed, various quantities of grain, things of that nature. That would go specifically to the high priest family to provide for them, since they would not be entitled to land. So, again, God is reiterating this. Okay, verse 10.
As the most holy gifts you shall eat it. Every male shall eat it. It shall be holy to you.
Okay, so these gifts are not to be bought and sold or used as commodities or for trade or for anything other than the sustenance of their family. Okay, so these gifts shall be set apart. Every male shall eat it. So all of the priests are entitled to have this as their portion for their sustenance. And then we'll learn later on that much of the offering would also be acceptable, or their families would go to providing food and nourishment for their families. Verse 11.
This also is yours, the offering of their gift, that is, all the wave offerings of the sons of Israel. I have given them to you and to your sons and daughters with you as a permanent allotment. Every one of your household who is clean may eat it.
Okay, so God again is reminding the reader and Aaron in this case that a portion of the specific offerings called wave offerings, and we learned from our previous studies that the wave offering was literally what it sounded like. So the object, the item, an animal, an allotment of grain, an allotment of oil, very specific things, would be held up and would be acknowledged, would be waved in front of the Lord, specifically for the purposes of acknowledging that it was a gift from him or a gift offered to him. But the wave offering would not be placed on the brazen altar. It would not be consumed by fire. Okay. Instead, the portion would go to the families of the high priests. And notice that it says here, your sons and daughters may eat of it. Okay. And then it specifies everyone of your household who is clean may eat of it. Okay. It was a holy offering, a set-apart offering, a sacred offering unto the Lord. So everyone who was clean would be able to eat of it. And we know that there were various stipulations and rituals that the individuals would go through to make themselves clean again if they were sullied or soiled, if you will, from various actions, whether it be touching a dead person or something of that nature.
Yeah, or contacting like even a dead animal,
or
discharge from
discharge,
something.
Yeah.
Bodily discharges.
Right,
That
because
would
again, recall,
make you unclean.
Yeah, recall that the priests were also charged with inspecting the people and deeming them clean or unclean,
Right.
and then instituting the procedure.
You look for skin wounds and
Yeah,
things like that.
the procedures that would lead that person towards cleanliness. And it sounds odd to us in our 21st century ears, but recall that many of the prohibitions and restrictions and isolations that were put in place through the law actually were far, far, far ahead of the hygienic practices that were commonly associated with this period in human history. So many of the law of the requirements did lead to a greatly increased public health.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So again, because the Levites or the Aaronic priesthood, because they did not have the privilege or the opportunity to own land outright, farmland, in order to grow crops, they were given a portion of the offering that would be brought to the tabernacle.
Right. That's how they were. God is setting it up so that the servants of God who are not having their own inheritance are going to be cared for by the people of God. So that's what he's setting it up here.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. Verse 12.
So, and all the best of the fresh oil, and all the best of the fresh wine, and of the grain, the first fruits of what they give to the Lord, I have given them to you. The first ripe fruits of all that is in their land, which they bring to the Lord, shall be yours. Every one of your household who is clean may eat it.
So recall that when people were to bring their offerings, they were to bring the very best. They weren't to bring the rotted, moldy, puny fruit, or the old stale wine, or the wine that tasted muddy or whatever. They weren't to bring the sickly grain or anything like that. They were to bring the very best that they had, the first of their harvest, which is an example, or it's a way of showing their trust in the Lord, because they're bringing the first of the harvest, assuming that there's going to be a continued harvest.
Right.
And during this time frame, we know that God did provide, and He did provide for the people as long as they were obedient. And so they would bring that, and then God is saying, now a portion of that will also be set aside, the best of the best, if you will be set aside to the priestly class for their service. And again, the idea is not because they were privileged, but because of the work that they were doing. They were focused on that, and so they would be rewarded with that because of the hard work that they were doing. And again, it was a daunting task, lest anyone think that the high priest had it easy. Oh no, they worked from sun up to sunset. They worked very hard, processing, if you will, the offerings and acknowledging.
Well, because if there's like 2.5 or 3 million people, and divide that into families, then every family was bringing their first this, first that, so
Right.
It was by, many of these offerings were by individual families, not by, not by like complete tribe, not like, oh, there's just 12 tribes, so there was just 12, even that, those 12 like bowls, for a sin offering, so.
So, yeah, exactly.
I mean, that would be a lot, but just think of it like this is by family, a lot of it.
Yeah.
And there was 2.5 or 3 million people.
That's a lot of processing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of processing. So
I mean, and the whole tribe of Levi would be able to partake of this, because the whole tribe of Levi would not be inheriting any land.
Right.
So,
right.
So it wasn't just like Aaron and his family. It was
Right.
bigger than that,
Right. Now we know that by the time of Jesus, some 1,000 years later, that this process, this method, if you will, did in fact get corrupted, and the high priest and the priestly class did start to extort the people, and did start to profit unreasonably from that. There's nothing wrong with making a decent living, but they were, not only were they profiting off of the people, they were extorting the people, and they were then using their position to lord it over the people, which was never God's intent.
Right.
And why God had instituted all of these safeguards. But again, the problem's not with God. It's never with God. The problem is with the sinful heart of humanity. So we see that over and over and over. So commentator Guzik, he talks about this. He says the heave offerings, or the wave offerings, were brought to God as part of the peace offering, or a Nazarite's consecration offering, and for a thanksgiving offering. In the heave offering, a choice portion of the animal, the breast or the thigh, was heaved or waved before the Lord. Afterwards, that choice portion of meat was for the priest and his family, and was considered holy, so it had to be eaten in the holy place. Yeah, that was one of the stipulations in many of these offerings, is that, again, they couldn't be taken home, they couldn't be stored, they couldn't be sold. They had to be eaten then and there, or consumed by fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So 15.
Every firstborn of the womb of all flesh, whether human or animal, which they offer to the Lord, shall be yours. However, you must redeem the human firstborn, and the firstborn of unclean animals you shall redeem. As to their redemption price, from a month old you shall redeem them by your assessment 5 shekels in silver by the shekel of the sanctuary, which is 20 gerahs.
Okay, which is a weight. Okay, so to make it abundantly, unemphatically, or undeniably clear that the firstborn of every female giving birth was consecrated unto the Lord. However, unlike the pagan cultures surrounding Israel, human sacrifice was never, ever, ever acceptable to God. Never acceptable to God, and was never tolerated by God. Yes, God did instruct Abraham to offer Isaac up as a sacrifice, but God intervened before Abraham actually killed his own son, right? It was a test. It was a test. Right. Okay. That's the only time I can think of when God even did that.
Right, even came close to accepting a human sacrifice. That's the only one. Really.
That's the only one I've
ever heard of.
Yeah. So God did not and never required human sacrifice, ever. And there was absolutely no way that anyone could justify human sacrifice as being pleasing to God, because it never, ever was. So, but however, the firstborn of the womb of all flesh, whether human or animal, was to be offered up to the Lord. So if it was a firstborn human, I'm a firstborn human son, so would have been consecrated to the Lord, or would have been an offering would have been made. Okay, in this case, it was to be 5 shekels. So even Joseph and Mary did this. Since Jesus was the firstborn of Mary, they went to Jerusalem at the appropriate time, and they made an offering for Jesus, but it was a monetary offering. Okay, where are we? You shall offer to the Lord.
5
you
shekels.
must redeem the human firstborn, and the firstborn of unclean animals you shall redeem. Again, because unclean animals could not be offered up as a sacrifice, so they would be redeemed instead. Okay,
or paid for, basically.
Paid for, basically a tax, if you will, a temple tax.
Kind of a tax, right?
Would be placed on them, and they would be redeemed by monetary means. Clean animals would be actually offered up. So lambs, goats, oxen, those would have been offered up. The firstborn would have been offered up as an actual sacrificial animal.
Right. Let's going to get to that in 17.
Yeah, it will. Yeah. As to their redemption price, from a month old you shall redeem them by your assessment 5 shekels. So this had to be done by a month old. Okay? Verse 17.
So, but the firstborn of an ox or cattle, the firstborn of a sheep, or the firstborn of a goat, you shall not redeem or exchange for cash. They are holy. You shall sprinkle their blood on the altar and offer up their fat in smoke as an offering by fire for a soothing aroma to the Lord. However, their meat shall be yours. It shall be yours like the breast of a wave offering and like the right thigh.
Okay.
So verse 18 is saying, like what Dan just said, the clean animals of the cattle, sheep, and goats were sacrificed.
Mm-hmm. They were sacrificed.
And then it was allowed to be eaten.
Right. They did not go to waste. They
Right.
did not go to waste in that offering. It was not a waste. And again, because these were farm animals, they would be they would most likely have many offspring.
Yeah, and this is all the first fruits offering we're talking about here.
Right.
First fruits sacrifice or offering.
Right. And much of this is a reiteration of what was covered in previous chapters and previous books, actually. So again, God never wavers. He
Right.
doesn't waver. We forget. We adjust.
Yeah.
We
Compromise
compromise. Yeah, that's probably a
in
better
our
word.
thinking.
We compromise, and God is making it abundantly clear. This is what I said. This is what I meant. This is what I want. Okay? And again, it's his prerogative. He is God. We are not. Okay. Verse 19.
All of the offerings of the holy gifts which the sons of Israel offer to the Lord, I have given to you and your sons and your daughters with you as a permanent allotment. It is a permanent covenant of salt before the Lord to you and your descendants with you.
Right. And now that sounds weird to us. So all the offerings are holy gifts. Okay, we understand that part. Okay, they are set apart. They are specified purposes. Holy meaning set apart. They're set apart. Which the sons of Israel offer to the Lord. I have given to you and your sons and your daughters, i.e., your families. Okay, as a permanent allotment. Okay, for as long as the sacrifice is in place. Okay, this would be how the Aaronic class, the Levites, the high priest, were to acquire the essentials of life. Okay, it is a permanent covenant of salt before the Lord to you and your descendants. So we have to explore that idea of a covenant of salt. What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, Spurgeon, the great commentator Spurgeon, he put it this way. And again, the phrasing is a bit archaic because of the time frame that Spurgeon lived, but it's still understandable. By which was meant, covenant of salt, which was meant that it was an unchangeable, incorruptible covenant which would endure as salt makes things to endure, so that it is not liable to putrefy or corrupt. So we've all probably heard this, but salt was a almost priceless commodity in the ancient world. Think pre-refrigeration, pre-antibiotic, various storage methods that we commonly use today. So salt was an incredible. We laugh because salt seems so common to us and so abundant and so cheap and so everywhere, right? But in the time frame that we're talking about, salt was incredibly valued commodity, even into Roman times. And again, we've probably all heard this, but the very word salary refers to a salt allotment that would be given to Roman soldiers. They would be paid with a portion of salt that they could then use to preserve their foodstuffs and the things that they needed to survive, to carry with them. So salt was a commodity, and by its nature, salt could preserve things and keep them, when it says uncorruptible, i.e. keep them free of bacteria and germs and things that would harm the individual from, or if they tried to eat the food otherwise. So the idea is that this is a covenant of salt. This is a covenant that is to endure essentially until Jesus came and Jesus died on the cross. Okay, so it's a colloquialism, if you will, to clarify how permanent. This isn't going to just last until the next administration. This doesn't just go on until another high priest steps up to the plate. No. This goes beyond the individuals in the position. This is an ordinance that is to be followed throughout time.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. It's a forever binding ordinance.
Right. So it's kind of a cool thing. If something was sealed with salt, a covenant was made, and then it was sealed with salt. It was indicative, it was symbolic. It was symbolic of forever.
Yeah, eternal and unbreakable is how the NLT puts it.
That's
It's
good.
an
I like
eternal and unbreakable covenant.
that. Right.
Permanent.
Read the whole thing.
So it says, Yes, I am giving you all of these holy offerings that the people of Israel bring to the Lord. They are for you and your sons and daughters to be eaten as your permanent share. This is an eternal and unbreakable covenant between the Lord and you, and it also applies to your descendants.
There you go. Oh, the Sardinas ask a question, two questions actually. How many sacrifices are made in a day? I don't know off the top of my head, but it was in the hundreds, if not thousands.
Yeah, I mean, I was just Googling it because I saw their question, and it was like one Josephus Flavius, who was in New Testament times,
Right.
contemporary, but he recorded that somehow 1.2 million animals would be offered in a day, but that was when there was more than one maybe temple location.
Right, right.
So, because later on there becomes, when they settle the promised land, there's temples, places of sacrifice are, I think, spread out. Like they don't all just have to, for all these sacrifices, have to go back to Jerusalem all the time. I mean, some of the annual ones, but like the daily sacrifices and stuff.
Right, they were supposed to go, but to the temple, yeah, for the big sacrifices, yeah.
Right, for the big ones, but then there's ways that other ones can happen. So.
And then how much could be consumed each day? Well, keep in mind that the Levite families, there were many, many Levites. They numbered in the tens of thousands, and they all had families.
Right.
So a considerable amount would be consumed in a day. So, and again, keeping in mind this is pre-refrigeration and so on and so forth.
Well, but like you were just saying, they could use the salt to preserve it.
Some of it.
Yeah. If it was allowed. Yeah.
So, a covenant of salt. I guess the best example or the closest example we would have is when you slide a wedding band on your spouse. The idea is that it's just a piece of metal. It's literally just a piece of metal, sometimes a very expensive piece of metal and rock, okay? But it's not the object that has the value, it's the promise of the value, or the promise behind the object. So in the same way, salt is, like I said, salt is incredibly common for us today, but it would have been a very prized possession back then, so it meant something. But it was the symbology, the symbolism behind the salt, the act of that. So here we go, moving on to verse 20.
Then the Lord said to Aaron, "You shall have no inheritance in their land, nor own any portion among them. I am your portion and your inheritance among the sons of Israel."
So again, God reiterates.
Right.
He reiterates that the Levite, the Aaronic class of priests, they are not entitled to a portion of the promised land, that their portion would be through the service of the temple. Hence, all of these things being spelled out for them so that they could, in fact, survive and provide for their families. Okay, and I am your portion and your inheritance among the sons. And remember, God had told the people that through Moses that the Levites were, he considered them his portion from amongst the tribes. The Levites were his, and thus set apart for service, and thus not entitled to land, and thus all of the things that we've just read were set up for their benefit so that they could live. And this is reiterated in many places in Scripture. Okay, many of the Psalms talk about the Lord being our portion. Okay, Psalm 16:5. O Lord, you are my portion, the portion of my inheritance and my cup. You maintain my lot. And indeed he does. Psalm 73:26. My flesh and my heart fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. This idea of God being there for us, God providing, God being what we need to survive, God being our life support, if you will. Okay? Psalm 142, verse 5, I cried out to you, O Lord. I said, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Again, the psalmist is clearly indicating that mindset of like, come what may, I'm going to count on the Lord to provide. He will be my portion. He will be my rescuer. He will be my provider. He will be what sustains me. So, verse 21.
To the sons of Levi, behold, I have given all the tithe in Israel as an inheritance in return for their service which they perform, the service of the tent of meeting.
So again, so their wages, if you will, were to come from the tithe. The tithe, and in part, this is where we get the idea of that a pastor's salary or a pastor's
Supported by the church financially.
is supported by the church. The tithe goes to the support of the individual or the people that are overseeing the day-to-day duties and responsibilities of the church, okay, or in this case of the temple. So they were taken care of also. So they were entitled to portions of food, but they were also entitled to a monetary value, which they could then use to survive and to purchase the things that they needed. Again, this is Guzik. The New Testament speaks with great clarity on the principle of giving, that giving should be regular, planned, proportional, and private. It must be generous, freely given, and cheerful. So, God says in Scripture, he says, God loves a cheerful giver. He loves a cheerful giver. Yes, he commanded the people to give a tithe, okay, as a way of acknowledging their reliance upon him and their gratitude, okay. He gives us 90%, and he asks us to give back 10%, and yet there are many, many people who grudgingly give that portion out of obligation and not out of reverence and fellowship with God. And the New Testament is very clear on that. That we need to be generous. It needs to be given freely and cheerfully. So, and it should be done regularly. It should be just a natural part, a planned part of your how you budget your finances and things of that nature. It should be proportional to whom much is given, much is required, but it should be proportional. So there should never be any pastor who puts a burden on his people by saying that you are not giving enough. That pastor is not leading well.
Right.
They're not leading well.
Right.
It should be proportional, okay?
Right.
And unlike the Sadducees and the Pharisees of Jesus' time, who made a big show of it, it should be private.
Well, and there are some churches today that do the dance up to the offering basket in the center, you know? So it's kind of a cultural thing within some, church groups, some church cultures. And so that's what I was thinking of, like, well, that's not very private.
Right.
So you have to be careful. I mean, I kind of think that tradition or that, method of collecting tithes and offerings it kind of goes along with the cheerful part,
Yeah.
But it's not a private,
Right.
It's not private if you're dancing down the aisle and going up to the box or the basket in front here in the center, like between me and Dan, and you'd come down the aisle and then we'd have music playing and everyone dances and puts in whatever they put in, a check, money,
Right.
an envelope. And some people actually put in an empty envelope when when we're passing even the traditional way of just passing the plate. People like, oh, I don't want to look bad, but I don't want to give anything, so they just put an empty envelope in sometimes. So, yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Like, well, those are two things that are not really quite lining up with what God intended for us in our giving.
Yeah, there were many times when I would assist at various places. I would assist with counting the offering after a church service, and it was surprising how many times we would be counting the money and getting it ready for deposit and doing all the appropriate things with the finances. But it would always break my heart when I would come across empty envelopes, because that meant that the person, maybe they felt obligation, or they felt peer pressure, or they felt like they could not just allow the offering plate to go by, that they had to put something there lest they incur the suspicion or the judgment of people sitting next to them. And that always broke my heart. It always broke my heart, because a church should not be that way. A church
Right.
should not be judgmental of somebody's finances,
Right.
or their position. You have no idea what expenses that person may have incurred, or what they might be eating at home. They might be sharing the cat's food or something like that. And so those empty envelopes just were like a stab in the heart every single time, because they just reiterated to me that somebody was feeling guilty, or feeling pressured, or feeling like they had to make a show for what?
Right. And when
'Cause
I
it's
was
certainly not fooling God.
when I was counting the offering during those times, like, what was always striking to me was how many times people just put in, coins or pennies, or
Right.
I mean, they put in what they had, like the widow's mite.
Right.
I felt like I was very humbled, to
Oh, those
say-
were precious.
That's
Those were
precious,
so
because we
precious.
think, oh, I have to give to God. Oh, it's not a cheerful
Right.
thing that when we think of it, and we're thinking, wow, I'd rather spend that money some other way. But then you have people that's what they could spare, and we know their story, so like, well, they didn't even have that to spare.
Right.
$1.35, or whatever it was. You just think, wow, so this is really like a widow's mite being given, and God will
yeah.
use it and multiply it and honor that in their lives. So
Oh, and many of the times when we would just get those envelopes, and rarely did Gay and I ever count together. It's not
Right.
it's not considered appropriate for a husband and wife to handle the finances together like that. Not that we're going to do anything wrong, but just to be upfront, just to
Right.
be beyond reproach, I guess you could say.
yeah,
But many of the times when the person or the persons that I was counting with, and we come across those little envelopes with coins, and we would see that if the person, sometimes they would put their name on the envelope, we would just stop and just pray. Like,
Right.
thank you, Lord.
right,
Thank you for this giver's heart. Bless them so that they can multiply this. Bless them.
Amen.
Whatever they're going through, Lord, bless that.
right.
And so it's funny that the empty envelopes were heartbreaking, but the coinage, or the dollar, or whatever,
Yeah,
those were precious.
those
They
were
so
inspiring,
precious.
right? Yeah, humbling and inspiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
Robin has a question. Do
Uh-huh.
any verses say, "You are my salt"?
I don't think so.
But well, I googled it because I saw your question,
Oh.
Robin. And basically, none say you are my salt. But in Matthew 5:13 through 16, Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth."
Ah, yeah.
And
That's
if the
true.
salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? So that's in the Beatitudes, or his
Right.
Sermon on the Mount. Sorry, Sermon on the Mount. It says, "You are the salt of the earth." So, no, I don't know of any verses that say, "You are my salt," like He is our salt. But He clearly says, Jesus spoke and said, "We are the salt of the earth."
We are His salt.
We are
and
His salt.
So He considers us
So that's
valuable.
very, very valuable. Yeah.
Considers us valuable. So great question, Robin.
Yeah,
Great
very good.
question. So the Levites were entitled to a portion of the tithing, of the tithes that the people were told to bring in throughout the year for various festivals and things of that nature. Let's see. These are all things that we've talked about. 2 Corinthians, each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. So verse 22.
"And the sons of Israel shall not come near the tent of meeting again, or they will bring sin on themselves and die."
Okay.
So God's saying, he's already killed many people
Right.
for not
right.
worshiping him correctly, for grumbling, for complaining, for not being obedient and doing whatever they want. So he's saying, this is how it's done. Aaron is the high priest, and his sons assist him, and all of the Levite tribe serves God in the temple,
Right.
in the tabernacle, and anyone else who tries to like sub in, like, oh, they can't just say, oh, wait, I'm going to have my cousin Jim come and, oh, he'll take over helping with the offerings, or he'll take over, and he's from the tribe of Dan, or another tribe.
Right.
Like, no, he will be dead. So,
Right.
and you will probably be dead because you're the one that invited him. So
Right, because part of the rebellion was, again, to reiterate, part of the rebellion was that Korah, who was in fact a Levite, but he wanted more. He wanted to be a part of the priestly class, and others were in agreement with him. He rose up at least 250 leaders,
right,
who wanted to be a part of that, but for the wrong reasons, the absolute wrong reasons.
right,
And so God has spelled out in great detail how the running of the tabernacle is supposed to proceed and stuff like that. And then he reiterates here that the sons of Israel, meaning the non-Levites, okay,
right,
not a lesser class, because he's calling them all sons of Israel.
right. Their family.
Okay. There's no class going on here. There's just saying those who are not Levites shall not come near the tent of meeting again, because they're not chosen. They're not the portion that's set aside. Okay, they're not the ones that I've set aside for my purposes. So they shall not come. And I'm so serious about this that if somebody is flippant and casual about it, they will die.
Right.
They will die.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I was reading another section, and I guess this is part of what made me think of it as a study for tonight, about how, like, sometimes we want to invite people to participate in serving God, but if they're not actually called by God, if they're not actually, a child of God, there are certain things that we should not put them in the position of doing, just because they have like a talent or a gifting. I think I've talked about this before. Like, it's a precarious place if we take someone and say, oh, well, you're a really good speaker, so why don't you lead, this, why don't you say this, or why don't you get up on the platform and lead the people in this, but that person isn't saved, isn't called by God,
Right.
just because they're a good speaker, and you're like, oh, well, Jojo is out sick today, so let's grab Bobby. But just, we need to be careful, because God is saying there's an order, and there needs to be a reverence, and there needs to be rules that we obey, and you're setting someone up.
Right. And just to be crystal clear, watch what God says in the next verses.
So 23, only the Levites shall perform the service of the tent of meeting, and they shall bear their own guilt. It shall be a permanent statute throughout your generations, and among the sons of Israel they shall have no inheritance, no other support financially, for the tithe of the sons of Israel, which they offer as an offering to the Lord, I have given to the Levites as an inheritance. Therefore I have said concerning them, they shall have no inheritance among the sons of Israel.
Meaning they shall not be entitled to any land.
Right.
Okay.
They have no land,
But
or
God,
animals of their own,
right.
or anything
God
like
makes
that.
it abundantly clear. This is how I've set it up. This is
Right.
how I intend for it to go. Okay, verse 25.
So then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, moreover, you shall speak to the Levites and say to them, when you take from the sons of Israel the tithe, which I have given you from them for your inheritance, then you shall present an offering from it to the Lord, a tithe of the tithe. Your offering shall be credited to you like the grain from the threshing floor, or the full produce from the wine vat. So God is saying, so they're going to be given, things as tithes, and even money, because remember, animals and firstborns were redeemed, firstborn humans and then firstborn of unclean animals were redeemed. So there was cash, there was money coming in that was given to the Levites, and this was an offering, a tithe. But now the Levites were supposed to tithe to God on all their income.
Right. Right. So even the Levites, even the priestly class was expected by God to tithe, not because God needed the money, but to keep them aware of where that provision actually came from. Robin said, is this why King Saul was judged for going ahead with the sacrifice? In part, yeah.
Yeah.
In part, he assumed a role that was not his to assume.
Right.
So, yeah. Because he would have been from the tribe of, Judah.
Judah.
Yeah,
David,
yeah,
Judah. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe it's tribe of Benjamin. So,
Yeah.
But anyway, but he was not a Levite. He was not a Levite. He
Right.
was not entitled to that. So I think it was a Benjamite. Okay. Guzik says the Levites themselves were not exempt from tithing. They were to give a tenth of everything that was given to them in honor of the Lord. Verse 29.
Out of all your gifts you shall present every offering due to the Lord, from all the best of them, the sacred part from them, and you shall say to them, when you have offered from it the best of it, then the rest shall be credited to the Levites, like the product of the threshing floor, and like the product of the wine vat.
Okay, which would have been very important. The grain and the wine would have been extremely important to the overall sustenance of the culture. And so again, even the Levites and the priests were not exempt from this idea of giving the very best to God first. They weren't to take. So God is making a very clear distinction that yes, they are set apart for service. No, they are not better than any of the other tribes. They are just in a different role, okay? And they are required to give the best of the best, if you will. So this idea that God does not look upon position or title or anything like that, but God is requiring it of each and every Israelite, or each and every believer, I should say. Guzik, firstborn and first fruits were risky giving. Your land might not yield much more produce, and your cow or ewe might not give birth again. Yet the first still belonged to God and was given to the priest. God promised to bless this giving of the first fruits and the firstborn in faith. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first fruits of all your increase, so your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine. That comes from Proverbs 3, 9, and 10. So it's risky, but it's only risky from a human perspective because God never fails.
Right.
God does not fail. Verse 31.
You may eat it anywhere, you and your households, for it is your compensation in return for your service in the tent of meeting, and you will bring on yourselves no sin by reason of it when you have offered the best of it. But you shall not profane the sacred gifts of the sons of Israel, so that you do not die.
Yeah, so these tithes and these things, these could be utilized amongst the households. They did not have to be eaten in the temple. They could be eaten, taken home and eaten in the family domicile. Okay, and God makes it clear it is your compensation in return for your service in the tent of meeting. And you shall bring on yourselves no sin when you have offered the best of it. And there's a stern warning here: do not profane the sacred gifts, so you do not die.
Right, in the NLT it says, you the Levites and your families may eat this food anywhere you wish, for it is your compensation for serving in the temple. You will not be considered guilty for accepting the Lord's tithes if you have given the best portion to the priest. So if you've tithed on it, you can keep it and enjoy it. But be careful not to treat the holy gifts of the people of Israel as though they were common. If you do, you will die.
There you go.
So don't be unappreciative.
Right.
Don't be like, well, it's about time they brought in some chickens and doves, and I was getting tired of cattle or beef,
Right.
I don't know. Just don't just take it for granted.
But again, like we said just a moment ago, the bigger lesson here is that God is not setting up a class distinction. He's setting up a role distinction, but not a class distinction, because the Levites were indeed to essentially make the same types of offerings that the rest of the tribes were to, just from a different resource, a different source. But they were still required to give their best and to tithe their best, or
Right.
the best of what they received, I should
Yeah,
say.
this makes me, there's a lot of churches, makes me think about, it's biblical, that practice at a lot of churches, that if you're on staff at the church and you're being supported, by God's people, you're required to tithe on
Yeah.
your salary. And that's kind of, it's biblical. We're seeing it right here. This is exactly where that idea
Yeah.
would come from. So I think it was correct, and
Mhm.
as a pastor or person who's being supported by God's people, you should have in your heart that joy of giving. You should be setting the
Absolutely.
example. So we should be doing that. But I know that there are some, I heard somewhere that, like, someone had a position, at a church, and they were let go, and the reasoning was that they were not tithing.
Right.
Well, they weren't tithing. So because they were staff at a church and receiving a salary, and they should have been tithing. So that's biblical, and it's a common practice. This is why God says you should do it. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
you could die.
Yep.
So very
And that
important.
brings us to the conclusion, believe it or not, the conclusion of chapter 28.
Wow.
28, 18.
28. Ooh, jumped ahead there.
I just looked down, I looked at a number.
We're going to
So-
go to 28.
Yeah, no.
We're going to keep going tonight to chapter 28.
Yeah, chapter 18. So,
Chapter 18 is over.
yeah, so we'll pick up the narrative again next Thursday. We thank you one and all for joining us.
Yes, thank you guys.
We love doing this, and so we appreciate you guys so much for faithfully tuning in, and we sincerely hope that you find these lessons valuable and refreshing and encouraging, above all, encouraging, and directing your thoughts to the goodness of God.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Amen.
we are blessed and privileged
Yeah.
by your
Participation.
participation, and by just the privilege of getting to do this.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Each and every week. So thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you,
Blessings
God.
to you all.
Thank
Have
you.
a great, safe week, and we will see you
Next
next
week, I believe.
Thursday.
Yep.
Okay?
I think so.
Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.